I've sold the cottage in Edisto and Dad's Mustang, Mom. We need the money for our investment. Take care. My daughter's voice came through the phone, cold and clipped, right there in the waiting room of the cardiologist's office. The sentence was short, sharp as a blade, and before I could say a word, the call ended. No apology, no hesitation, just an announcement. I sat there, hands clasped together, listening to the air conditioner blowing its dry breath. Across from me, an elderly couple whispered over their test results. A child whimpered softly in his mother's arms. And I, Helena Morris, 69 years old, sat still among strangers while my heart ached not from illness, but from something far worse, the feeling of being betrayed by my own child. Melissa is my only daughter. I spent my life raising her, giving her the education I could never dream of having. She once held my hand in that old classroom, tracing her first letters, laughing when Daniel, my husband, taught her how to drive around the Edisto Bay shore. That little cottage by the bay was our first home, the place Daniel built brick by brick, painted wall by wall. It was where Melissa's laughter used to echo through the porch. And now she had sold it all, as if signing away a meaningless transaction. The 1,968 wine red Mustang, the birthday gift I gave Daniel when he turned 40, was on that list too. The car still smelled of real leather and his sandalwood cologne. Every Sunday morning, Daniel would wipe it down with a soft cloth, whistling the same old tune. I once thought that when I was gone, that car would be the one thing left to remind her of her father. But Melissa sold it. She didn't just sell a car, she sold a lifetime of memories. I didn't cry. I simply leaned back in my chair and stared up at the pale fluorescent light. My tears had already been spent during the last 8 months since Daniel passed. His death had been the kind of fall that makes you believe you'll never stand up again. But at that moment, hearing Melissa talk about her father's home in such calculated tones, something inside me woke up cold, sharp, and frighteningly calm. The doctor called my name. I went in and answered the usual questions automatically. "Your heart's fine," he said. "You just need rest. Avoid stress." I smiled, nodded. He didn't know that my pain wasn't coming from my heart. It was coming from my memories. When I stepped outside, I stopped by a poster that read, "Keep your heart healthy. It's where your memories live." I stared at it for a long time, remembering the last morning I had with Daniel. He was making coffee, turned to me, and smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart." 3 minutes later, he collapsed. The coffee spilled across the table, spreading like a dark wound. That day, Melissa came rushing home, wrapped her arms around me, sobbing, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of you." I believed her. I truly did, and perhaps that was my only mistake. After the funeral, Melissa came by every week, holding my hands and saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I've got everything under control." She spoke about investments, about managing assets, about signing a few papers to simplify the banking process. I signed them. I didn't read. My eyes were tired, my heart even more so. She kissed my forehead before leaving, promising, "You'll never be alone." 3 weeks later came today's call. I stepped outside into the Charleston sunlight, the wind carrying the scent of oak leaves and sea salt. I strolled, my heartbeat blending with the city noise. Maybe to someone passing by, I looked like an old woman who'd just received bad news from the doctor. But no, the bad news came from somewhere else, from the person I once trusted most. I thought back to the amber envelope Daniel had handed me a week before he died. He had said, "Open it when you're ready." When he passed, I tucked it into the oak drawer and forgot about it. Grief makes people forget what matters most. But now, with everything taken from me, I suddenly felt ready. I took the bus home. Outside, the sunset slipped over the old rooftops, reflecting in the window like a faint mirror image of myself, a silver-haired woman, weary but with eyes clearer than ever. Daniel once told me, "You have a way of going silent that scares people, Helena, because when you're quiet, it means you're thinking." He was right, I was thinking. The house was silent when I unlocked the door. On the table sat the teacup I'd forgotten that morning, the faint trace of lipstick like a timestamp. I went straight to the living room and opened the oak drawer. The envelope was still there, covered in a thin film of dust. I picked it up, tracing the familiar handwriting, "For Helena when she's ready." My fingers trembled not from fear, but from knowing that from this moment on, my life would no longer be the same. I placed the envelope on the table and stared at it under the fading light. Outside, the sea breeze drifted in through the crack of the door, carrying the scent of salt and pine. For a moment, I could almost see Daniel sitting across from me, with those gentle eyes I missed so much. He was gone, but maybe he had never really left. Melissa thought she'd erased my past, but she didn't know that Daniel never did anything without planning 3 steps. He left me not just memories but a lesson, and perhaps a plan. I looked out the window, where the sky was turning violet, and I smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd won, but of someone who'd awakened. Everything she took from me, I would reclaim not with anger, but with the quiet intelligence Daniel had always believed I possessed. If you've ever been betrayed by the one you love most, if someone has ever treated your kindness like a currency to be traded, stay with me. Some stories don't end with tears, but with justice. And sometimes, that justice begins with an old envelope in a drawer. I'm Helena Morris, and this is the first day of my new beginning. Tell us where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys on Begin Again stories. Every morning, Daniel always woke earlier than I did, brewed coffee, and turned on the radio for the news. The rich scent of roasted coffee would spread through the small kitchen, blending with the smell of oak and the soft thud of waves against the porch. It was the sound I knew for 40 years of marriage, the sound of peace. But since the day he left, that kitchen has held only silence. No coffee aroma, no footsteps, only the green enamel mug still sitting in its old spot, the brown stain blooming like a low note of memory. I do not dare wash it. I am afraid of losing the last thing left of the mornings when he still called me sweetheart. When a person loses their other half, time becomes strange, both long and empty. I take on a few small classes at the local library, mostly to keep myself from sinking into silence. The rest of the time, each afternoon, I sit on the front porch and look out at Edisto Bay, where the sunset turns the water red. It was there that Daniel once said, "If one day I go first, let the sea remind you that I never truly left." We met when I was 22. I was a newly graduated teacher, and Daniel was a young engineer working at the shipyard. He appeared at my first parent meeting, not to ask about anyone's child, but to pay off a small debt for an orphan student I had secretly raised funds for. When I asked why, he simply said, "Because I see you still believe in the kindness others have stopped believing in." From then on, we were never apart. Daniel was not romantic in the roses sense, but he had a way of caring that kept me from ever feeling I had to fight alone. He always said, "You only need to keep your heart clean. I will take care of the rest." At 30, I gave birth to Melissa. She was the greatest joy of my life. I remember the first night we brought her home from the hospital. Daniel held her the whole time, refusing to put her in the crib. "Look at her," he whispered. "She looks so much like you." When Melissa grew older, he taught her the first rule: never take what you did not earn. Do not take anything you have not deserved. I carved that sentence into my memory because I once believed Melissa would live by it. But as the years passed, people's hearts changed. Daniel worked tirelessly, and I taught, raised our child, and kept the home. When Melissa went to college, he began making small investments. I did not ask questions. Daniel always said, "I only want to leave a little safety for the two of you." I never thought that money would become the crack between mother and daughter. Melissa grew up smart and quick, and gradually more ambitious than we had imagined. At 35, she started her own company in New York and married Ryan, a smooth talker who dressed well and always made others believe he was successful. On their wedding day, Daniel murmured to me, "I am not sure whether Ryan loves our girl or loves the way she opens the door for him to step into our world." I brushed it aside. I did not want to think poorly. When Daniel passed away, Melissa came home. She cooked, cleaned, and always held my hand tightly. Every time I cried, she said, "You have to be strong. I will take care of you for Dad." I believed. I wanted to believe. because not believing meant accepting that I was alone. But then I began to notice the small things, the signals we often overlook when we love, the whispered phone calls at midnight, the evasive look when I asked about Daniel's bank accounts. Every time I mentioned the cottage in Edisto, Melissa changed the subject and said, "You should sell it and live near me in New York for convenience." I smiled. I am not made for high-rises. She only pressed her lips together. I thought it was a concern. It turned out to be a calculation. One morning, I heard her speaking on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low and urgent. "Do not worry, Mom has signed the papers. As soon as we close, we will have the money." When I stepped in, she smiled and said it was a work matter. I did not ask further. There are moments in life when a mother knows the truth, but her heart chooses to believe the lie, because admitting the truth means losing her child. I started paying closer attention. One day, I opened Daniel's file cabinet to look for an insurance booklet. Among old documents, I saw the amber envelope, the one he had given me before he died. "Only open when you are ready." I set it back gently, my heart pounding. I was not ready then. I still believed love was enough to protect me from betrayal. I was wrong. A few days later, Melissa asked me to sign a few necessary papers to transfer the investment accounts. She spoke lightly, her eyes full of trust. I signed. I did not read. That signature, I later learned, was the blade carving into both my assets and my memories. After the funeral, she returned to New York, leaving only a message: "I will take care of everything for you. You just rest." I sent my heart after my child, and she sent back an empty house. By the time I received that call at the clinic, I was no longer shocked. I only felt hollow. Hollow like the kitchen without the smell of morning coffee. I understood one thing. Love does not protect us from betrayal. It only makes the fall hurt more. But I also understood something else. Daniel had never left. He left me a path, perhaps the very one inside that amber envelope. That night, I brewed a cup of mint tea, sat at the kitchen table, and listened to the sea wind pass through the window. The clock counted out slow beats. I whispered to myself, "My love, perhaps it is time for me to open it." If you have ever lived your whole life for others and received only silence in return, if you have ever believed that love is enough to keep someone by your side, stay with me. Because sometimes, only when everything collapses, do we finally see our true foundation. This is only the beginning of my journey to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet again. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. I turned on the desk lamp, the warm yellow light spilling across the wooden table, illuminating the amber envelope lying still, as if it had been waiting for this moment for the past 8 months. Daniel's words for Helena, "when she's ready," trembled slightly in the light, the ink already browned. My hand brushed it, the paper slightly rough, warm like skin, a long breath. I tore the edge of the envelope and heard the soft rip of paper, louder than the sound of the waves outside the window. Inside was not only a letter. There were neat stacks of documents, investment contracts, share certificates, a deed of ownership for a company named ML Holdings, a few bank forms signed by me, and a 2-page handwritten letter. Daniel's handwriting was still even and steady, like his voice on those peaceful mornings long ago. "Helena, if you are reading this letter, I am likely no longer by your side. I know you will hurt, but I also know you are stronger than anyone I have ever met. You always say I worry too much, but I call it love. Over the years, I have invested quietly, partly to protect you from the harsh world of numbers, and partly so that if anything happens to me, you will not have to worry about the future. You are the sole heir. Keep this to yourself, even from Melissa, until you truly need it, because money cannot save a person, Helena. Only clarity can do that." I reread the last line, my eyes blurring. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock hand moving on the wall. A strange feeling slid into my heart, both loss and a kind of power I had never expected. I, a 69-year-old woman who thought I would simply live out my remaining quiet days, was in fact holding everything my daughter thought she had taken. I laid each document out on the table, careful as if I were arranging the pieces of the past. An account in Savannah. 2 rental apartments in Beaufort, an equity stake in a growing maritime transport company, and most of all, ML Holdings itself, the name I had once heard Daniel mention as a small project. Now I understood. It was the shell he created to manage everything, under my name and no one else's. A tide of pride and pain washed through me. Pride because Daniel trusted me that much. Pain because he had no chance to see how his daughter had forgotten what honor means. I sat in silence for hours until the waves outside the window crashed harder, as if rousing me from a daze. The next morning, I took the envelope to Daniel's old office. The room still smelled of machine oil and old paper, and the photo of him with Melissa on her graduation day hung right above the desk. I looked into those eyes, the gaze of a proud father who believed his daughter would do the right thing. I whispered, "You were wrong, Daniel, but do not worry. I will finish the part you left undone." I sorted all the documents, recorded every account number and every piece of information. When I was done, I called Harlan & Co., the law firm Daniel had worked with. The secretary said, "Mr. Harlan always told us that if Mrs. Helena calls, put her through directly." Mr. Harlan's voice was rough, old, but firm. "Helena, Daniel told me about you. I suppose that letter has finally been opened." "Yes. And I think it is time you help me keep what belongs to Daniel." He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I will come to Charleston tomorrow, but if you want my advice, do not act out of anger. Use your knowledge, not your heart." That evening, I went out to the porch and brewed mint tea. The sea wind mixing with the steam made each of my thoughts feel distinct. Melissa does not know I am holding the trump card. She thinks I have lost everything. But Daniel taught me one thing. Silence is also a weapon if you can keep your heartbeat steady. I looked south, toward where the Edisto cottage lay quiet in the dark. I saw so clearly the image of a small Melissa running across the sand with a red kite. I once wished I could go back to that moment, hold her for a long time, and warn her that the world would not be easy. But time only goes one way. Now I can only move forward with the intelligence Daniel left me and with my own 2 hands. Night fell. I put the envelope back in the drawer, locked it, then wrote a short line in my notebook. Tomorrow, begin again. I did not know what I was about to step into, but I knew one thing for certain. I would no longer be the woman who waited for others to decide for her. If you have ever opened a letter that turned your life on its axis, if you have ever realized that the departed are still teaching you how to live again, stay with me. Because sometimes what makes us strong is not knowing all the answers, but daring to open the envelope we have feared all our lives. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to continue with me on the Begin Again Stories journey. The phone rang that afternoon as the last sunlight spilled through the window, casting gold across the wooden table where I was still sorting through Daniel's papers. The screen showed Melissa's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice came through softer than before, tinged with that carefully measured tone of regret that smells faintly of calculation. "I'm sorry if I spoke too quickly earlier, Mom. We sent you 25% of the money from selling the house and the car. I figured that should be enough for you to live comfortably for a few months." I smiled but said nothing, just listened to the hum of wind through the receiver. "You're still in Charleston, right? I was thinking of stopping by next week to bring you some cash, so the bank doesn't hold it too long." Her voice was too sweet, exactly the kind Daniel once used to describe the kind of businessmen he never trusted. When someone talks like they're pouring honey on their tongue, he used to say, "Check if they're hiding a knife behind their back." I turned on my computer and opened my bank account. The screen displayed exactly what Melissa had said, a transfer of $48,000 with a note attached. "Family support, love you, Mom." I stared at that line until my breathing slowed. $48,000. A number so small compared to the value of the cottage, the Mustang, all the memories my daughter had priced and sold. But what hurt more than the money were the 2 words, "love you." People can say they love you right after taking everything from you and believe that those words are enough to heal every wound. I hung up and stepped out onto the porch. Late autumn wind carried the scent of salt and the faint sound of church bells in the distance. I sat down on the wooden chair, took a sip of the cold tea, and whispered to myself, "Daniel, our daughter has forgotten the first lesson you ever taught her. Never take what you didn't earn." That night, I reopened the amber envelope and reread every document carefully. Each page felt like a thread tying me back to Daniel, a map guiding me through the land he had quietly built. I saw the investment contracts, my signatures legally notarized. Daniel had prepared everything with the precision of an engineer, every note, every clause, ensuring that I alone had the rights of inheritance. He had even anticipated betrayal, and like a skilled chess player, had moved 3 steps ahead. The next morning I went to the Harlan & Co. law firm, a red brick building on Broad Street where Daniel had met Mr. Harlan many times. The elderly secretary smiled and motioned me in. Mr. Harlan stood up when he saw me. He was tall, slightly stooped, his silver hair framing eyes bright as steel. "You came earlier than I expected," he said. "I was afraid if I hesitated my heart would soften," I replied. We sat down. I handed him the folder Daniel had left. He looked through it and nodded. "ML Holdings is still active. The assets are secure under your name." Daniel was a wise man. "I'm not as wise as he was," I said, "but I learned fast. I want to stay quiet. No one, not even my daughter, should know about this." "What do you plan to do with it?" "Wait. Watch. Sometimes the most effective punishment is letting someone believe they've won." Mr. Harlan squinted, then smiled faintly. "You're right. But let me remind you, when you realize you have power, don't wield it like a knife. Power can heal if used right." I stayed silent and wrote his words down. When I returned home, I opened my computer and searched for news. By coincidence, on the real estate news page, I saw a listing for the Edisto cottage, the house Daniel and I had built, now registered under a brokerage firm connected to Ryan Keller, Melissa's husband. The photo of the house glowed bright and polished, every angle perfect. Below it, the description read, "A coastal gem, ready for those who know how to live luxuriously. Price, $1,200,000. I looked at that number, thought of the $48,000 in my account, and smiled. So family love has a market price, after all, if you know how to convert it. I turned off the computer, took my cup of mint tea, and wrote in my notebook, "Stay calm, Helena. The storm is coming, but you are the wind." That night, Melissa called again. Her voice was slightly trembling. "I heard you still have some of Dad's papers. Could you send them to me so I can store them properly?" "Which papers?" "Just some things, shares, property deeds. I can manage them for you." I spoke softly, as if to a small student. "You know, I once taught you that the person who reads every small line is the one who survives. I still read every line. I still remember every number. And I don't hand over anything I don't understand." Silence on the other end. Then Melissa's voice returned, softer, edged with irritation. "I'm just trying to help. I know, but I've learned how to help myself." I hung up before she could say another word. I turned off the light and stood by the window, looking out. Charleston was quiet that night, the city lights reflecting over the Ashley River like silver ribbons. In the window's reflection, I saw myself not the frail woman in the cardiologist's waiting room, but someone holding truth in her hands. I whispered, "Daniel, the game has begun." If you've ever been underestimated by your own family because they thought you were weak, if someone has ever stolen what you built with your entire life, don't rush to strike back. Learn to stay silent, to observe, and to choose the moment when they least expect it. Because emotional justice isn't a scream, it's the calm gaze when the betrayer realizes they've walked straight into the trap they set themselves. Share where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe to the next episode of Begin Again Stories. I began my mornings differently. No more brewing tea and staring at the sea as I used to. I woke early, opened my notebook, and wrote down every small detail of ML Holdings, every investment Daniel left behind, every line of shareholder names. Gradually, I understood that the man I loved was not only an engineer. He was someone who saw farther than a lifetime. He left me a map, and now I was following each marker. On the 3rd day after meeting Harlan, I went to First Federal Bank. The staff recognized my name on the authorization and hurried me into a private room. A young woman with neatly tied hair spoke with a mix of respect and curiosity. "Are you Mrs. Helena Morris, the one listed on the ML Holdings account?" I smiled. "I believe so." When she handed me the summary sheet, my vision blurred for a second, not from age, but from the rows of zeros I had never dreamed could belong to me. More than $3 million in cash, 6 rental properties, and a portfolio of shares in a maritime conglomerate that was surging in value. Daniel, the man who drove an old pickup and spent his life saying we are fine with what we have, had quietly prepared an entire kingdom for me. On the way back, I stopped by the old cafe on Market Street where we used to sit, tally bills, and dream about the trip to Italy we never got to take. The espresso smelled the same, only the empty seat beside me was different. I looked at the green enamel mug, the kind Daniel always chose, and smiled. "You taught me that money does not make people happy, but sometimes it gives me the chance to choose what I deserve again." In the afternoon, I called Mr. Harlan. "I want all assets moved into an anonymous structure, but under my direct control." "You want to be the public owner?" "No, I want to be the shadow behind every signature." Mr. Harlan chuckled softly. "A widow who knows what she is doing is the most frightening person in the world." "No," I said, "just someone who finally learned how to protect herself." In the days that followed, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was still Mrs. Helena, the frail widow the neighbors pitied. I bought groceries at the small market, borrowed books from the library, and smiled when people asked, "Are you doing all right?" By night, I became someone else, the person who read financial reports, signed electronic orders transferring ownership, and sent emails to the attorney from the encrypted account Daniel had set up. I learned to read the flow of money. I discovered that Ryan was using part of the profit from selling the cottage to invest in a European fund that was, in fact, a debt laundering company tied to a shadowy financial group in Switzerland. The deeper I dug, the more I saw that Daniel was right. Never let others run a game whose rules they do not understand. One evening, I went to see Mr. Peterson, Daniel's former accountant, a thin man who always wore round glasses. His office was on the 2nd floor of an old building, the air smelling of paper and ink. He looked at me in surprise. "Mrs. Helena, Daniel said you would come when the time was right." "And that time is now," I said, placing the amber envelope on his desk. He opened it, scrutinized everything, then nodded. "All of it is legal. You have absolute rights. But if you want to stay quiet, you should form a new trust. No one, not even your daughter, will be able to trace it." "Do it," I said. "And do not ask why." Mr. Peterson looked at me, his eyes a mix of admiration and fear. "Daniel said you were gentle, but I think there is steel in you." I smiled and sipped my cold tea. No one stays gentle forever after being betrayed. That night, I got home late. Charleston's sky glittered with stars. I stood before the mirror and looked at a 69-year-old woman with silver-threaded hair and eyes no longer wet. I whispered, "Helena, your daughter thinks you have lost. You are only hiding so you can win at the right moment." I opened my notebook and added a line. "When people think you are weak, let them talk. Silence will be the final indictment." 2 weeks passed. Melissa did not call, did not text, but I knew she was still watching me through Ryan. I let it be. I let her believe I was struggling with the little money I had. I let the neighbors see me buying discounted groceries, carrying home a small bag of rice, and smiling faintly on the porch. The more I pretended to be weak, the stronger I felt. One afternoon, Aurora, my longtime neighbor, stopped by. She brought apple pie and a few fresh rumors. "Helena, I heard Melissa and her husband are heading to Zurich to invest in something. Word is they sold the beach house in a hurry. You agreed to that?" I feigned awkwardness and set my teacup down. "I trust she knows what she is doing." "I hope so, but you should be careful. Money makes people forget who raised them." I took Aurora's hand and looked into her eyes. "I am not afraid of losing money, Aurora. I am only afraid of losing the lesson." After she left, I sat alone for a long time. In the dark, I realized I was no longer a widow. I was the gatekeeper of an empire Daniel had built on trust. and now I would use it to teach my daughter what she had long forgotten, the value of honesty. Before bed, I received an email from Mr. Harlan. Subject: Transfer completed. Body: all assets now registered under your sole trust. Code name: Marigold. I looked at that code name, Marigold, the flowers Daniel planted by the porch. Marigolds are the symbol of steadfastness and rebirth. I laughed softly. You always knew how to make everything mean something, Daniel. If you have ever pretended to be weak to survive, if you have ever learned to become strong in silence, you will understand how I feel now. Some victories need no fireworks, only a woman smiling quietly in the dark, knowing that for the first time in her life, she is no longer afraid of anyone. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. 3 weeks after transferring all assets into the Marigold Trust, I began receiving the first signals from across the ocean. The message arrived on Monday morning while I was making tea. Mrs. Helena, this is Frederick, a representative of a bank in Zurich. There is an issue related to an account under the name Ryan Keller. Please contact us urgently. I looked at the words on the screen and felt my chest go cold, as if someone had thrown open a window in the middle of winter. I called back. The man's voice had a crisp German cadence, polite, yet tense. Mrs. Morris, we need to confirm. Does Mr. Keller have any connection to the company ML Holdings? No, I replied slowly. I have never authorized anything for Ryan Keller. He paused a beat, then said, Good, because he is using the company's name to open an investment account. We suspect signs of fraud. I pressed my lips together, thanked him, and hung up. The tea went cold. The clock ticked steadily. I sat in silence, as if I were hearing Daniel's own warning replayed. The one who can betray you, Helena, is never a stranger. That afternoon, I received an email with a photo attached. Subject: Zurich Gala Investment, April 4th. In the photo, Melissa wore the red satin dress I had given her for her 35th birthday, lifting a champagne glass and smiling brightly. Beside her stood Ryan in a black suit, his arm around his wife's waist. Behind them, on a large LED screen, was the company logo, ML Holdings Southeast Division. I stared at the photo for a long time. The lights were so dazzling they nearly washed out every face, with one thing that could not be hidden: smugness. The kind of smugness worn by those who think they have taken total victory, who think no one else can ever stand up again. I closed the laptop and shut my eyes. In the darkness, Daniel's image appeared clearly, his voice echoing in my memory. Helena, if the day comes when someone touches what I have entrusted to you, do not get angry. Be smarter. I opened my eyes. The anger had dissolved, leaving only a precision as cold as a thin blade. The next day, I went to see Harlan. The moment he saw the photo, his eyes sharpened. They used the company's name to solicit fake funding. That is a criminal offense. I do not want to sue, at least not yet, I said. I want them to expose themselves. What do you intend to do? Stay silent, as I have, but I want you to monitor every transaction related to ML Holdings from European banks. Anything bearing the names Ryan Keller or Melissa must be recorded. Mr. Harlan nodded, his expression both grave and impressed. You are playing a hazardous game, Mrs. Morris. I smiled slightly. No more dangerous than letting others think I am foolish. On the way home, I walked along the Charleston docks. The air was still, the water flat as glass, catching the bronze of the setting Sunday. I thought of Daniel, of the way he used to wash the Mustang every Sunday morning, meticulous as if tending a living thing. His daughter had sold it, not just the car, but the memory, the emblem of fidelity. And now she was sitting in a hall in Zurich, preaching about the company her own father had built. That night, I opened the old photo album. There we were in a disto, Daniel smiling, Melissa on her father's shoulders, her hair wild in the sea wind. I touched the child's face in the picture. If only you had kept what was in your eyes that day, Melissa, I whispered. You had everything and traded it to buy an illusion. On the 4th day, Harlan called back. We found that Ryan has transferred nearly $600,000 from a joint account into a fund called Romer Group. The address matches an ongoing money laundering investigation. And Melissa? She is with him. Her name appears on the Zurich conference invitation, under the title Vice Director of ML, holding Southeast Division. I let out a small laugh. How creative. She did not just steal, she promoted herself. That evening, I wrote a handwritten note to Harlan. Do not contact the police yet. Let them believe the performance is still running smoothly. I want to watch how they spend, because how a person spends is the truest mirror. When it ends, I want not only justice, but a lesson. The next day, Aurora stopped by with cookies and, as always, fresh gossip. Helena, have you heard? Melissa and her husband are in the papers. They are in Switzerland, posing with European investors. The whole neighborhood says they are very successful. I nodded and sipped my tea. Success is the most dangerous thing when it comes too soon, Aurora. You are not angry? I used to be, but now I have learned that anger only makes us more like them. Aurora sighed. If I were you, I would have called the police long ago. I looked out at the sea and smiled. I prefer to let the waves rise high enough before I drop anchor. At night, I opened Daniel's letter again. In the last line, he wrote, If you ever feel lonely, remember, I left you a map not only to the assets, but to clarity. I folded it, put it back in the drawer, and blew out the light. Outside, the sea beat the shore with the steadiness of a heartbeat, slow, patient, certain. I do not know if I am preparing for a reckoning or an awakening, but I know this. Some people only learn when they lose everything, and if fate intends for Melissa to go through that, I will not stand in the way. If you have ever watched a loved one turn love into exploitation, ever been labeled weak, just because you chose silence, remember, silence is not defeat. It is the time you spend building a bridge for justice to cross. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. The call came early on a Friday morning, when mist still veiled the fence and the waves had not yet reached the shore. I had just poured mint tea when the phone rang, the screen showing an international number +41. A premonition made my hands stop midair. The man's voice on the other end spoke precise, evenly measured English. Mrs. Helena Morris, I am Lieutenant Weber of the Swiss Federal Police. We need you to confirm a few details regarding the company ML Holdings. I set the teacup down, my chest cooling. Please go ahead. An American couple, Ryan and Melissa Kella, has been detained for investigation of financial fraud and falsification of investment records. They are using your company's name. In that moment, the room seemed to lose its air. I could hear every tick of the clock, every drop of water falling from the kitchen tap. Do you know these two people? I do. They are my family. A long silence. Weber continued, his voice lower. We understand this is sensitive, but you need to know that if you do not confirm ownership, the company may have all assets frozen. Do you wish to cooperate with the investigation? I looked out the window. First light fell across my hand, wrinkled and thin as paper. I whispered, Yes, I will cooperate. After the call, I sat still for a very long time. On the table, the mint tea still sent up a faint steam, but the scent had thinned. I thought of Melissa, the child who once feared the dark, who gripped my hand whenever thunder rolled. Now she was in an interrogation room half a world away, questioned over the very thing she had chosen. And strangely, I felt no pity. Only something deep and cold as the winter sea. This is the price of trust placed in the wrong place. That afternoon, Harlan came to the house. He carried new files from the Zurich bank. You received the call? Yes, and I confirmed that I am the lawful owner. Good. The Swiss police are coordinating with the FBI. They want to know if you intend to press charges. I was silent. If you do, he went on, your daughter will have to stand trial as an accomplice. I drew a long breath. Mr. Harlan, I do not need a courtroom to prove I am right. I only need my daughter to understand that some mistakes cannot be repurchased. That evening, I received an email. No subject, only a single line from a strange address. Mom, please answer me. I opened it. Melissa had typed in haste. The letters slanted. I know you have heard by now. I did not think it would go this far. Ryan said it was only borrowing the company's name to raise funds, and I believed him. I swear I did not know anything was wrong. They are holding my passport. I need you, please help. I read each word again and again. It was no longer the voice of the confident woman in the Zurich photo, but of the frightened child who once hid under the blanket waiting for me to sing her to sleep. But I also knew that between please help and I am sorry lay a chasm, and she had not crossed it. I sat at the table and took out stationery. The first line trembled, but the more I wrote, the steadier my hand became. Melissa, I have been silent for too long, and that very silence made you believe there were no consequences for wrongdoing. You sold your father's memories as if selling an object, and now you are learning the one lesson money cannot repurchase: responsibility. I will not save you this time. Not because I hate you, but because I love you enough to let you stand on your own. When you get out, I will still be in Savannah, but only when you are ready to apologize, not to explain. I signed my name, photographed the letter, and sent it by email. No extra lines, no justification. At night, I went out to the porch. Far off, the sea glittered in moonlight, the waves striking steadily, patient as an old teacher. I sat and listened to the wind hiss across the tiles and wondered, when does a mother earn the right to stop saving her child? Perhaps when salvation turns into cover. The next morning, Harlan called again. News from Zurich. Ryan is in custody, and Melissa is out on bail due to cooperation. I understand, I said. She will have to face the truth she has long avoided. Do you want me to repatriate all European assets? No. Leave them as they are. Let her see that everything still exists, only it no longer belongs to her. I hung up, then laughed a small, dry, genuine sound, not from joy, but from relief. For the first time in many months, I felt I was no longer afraid of losing anything. I took a fresh cup of tea and sat by the window. Morning sunlight fell across the page where I wrote another line in my journal. Emotional justice is not about proving who is right or wrong. It is about reclaiming peace after you have borne enough wounds. If you have ever had to choose between family and justice, you will know that such pain has no winner. But sometimes letting someone pay the price is the only way they can be saved. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. 3 weeks after the call with the Swiss police, when everything seemed to have quieted down, I received a thick envelope sent from Zurich. Brown paper, a corner stamped in red, handwriting slanted and so familiar my heart tightened. It was not Melissa's, it was Ryan Keller's handwriting. I took it out to the porch where the morning breeze carried the smell of sea salt and the cries of seagulls mixed with the ticking of the old wall clock. I opened the letter with the silver blade Daniel used to separate paper. Inside were 10 handwritten pages, careful and clear. I read, Mrs. Helena. I did not think there would be a day I would have to write to you, the person I avoided even when there was a chance to speak. But I have no choice. I am being held in Zurich. Melissa has been released, but she is not well. She does not cry, does not eat, and only sits for hours staring out the detention window. They say she is in shock, but I think she has only just realized what she has lost. You have every right to hate me. I deserve it. But please believe me, I never intended to deceive you or Daniel. I was only more ambitious than my abilities. Daniel once helped me secure a loan for my first project, and I swore I would repay it. But when he died, I did not know that most of the company's shares were in your name. Melissa believed they were her father's. I did not correct her, whether out of pride or stupidity, I am not sure. I paused and drew a deep breath. A gust of wind riffled the edge of the pages. I kept reading. When Melissa said she wanted to sell the cottage in Edisto, I objected. She said she needed the money to open a European branch. I was too tired of being the failed man beside a woman determined to prove she had won. I gave in. In Zurich, when they raised their glasses beneath the ML Holdings logo, I saw her eyes, the same light I saw in Daniel's photo in his office, confident, radiant, convinced she could not be wrong. The difference was that Daniel built to protect, while Melissa built to prove, and that was when I knew it was over. I signed papers I did not understand. I became complicit when I saw money flowing into the wrong accounts, and now I have to pay the price. On the last page, The letters were jagged, as if written in a hurry inside the cell. Mrs. Helena, I know you could save us, but please do not. Melissa needs this lesson. She still thinks her father would forgive her, that the world owes her something. I do not dare to teach her that. But you do. If one day you come to Zurich, tell her I still love her, but I cannot walk with her any longer. I believe Daniel was right. Only when everything breaks do people see what they are made of. I folded the letter, my heart churning like the surf. The wind rose over the bay, the smell of salt filling my lungs, stinging yet clean. I remembered the first time I met Ryan, a young man with brown hair and honest eyes, bringing flowers to my house to ask for my daughter's hand. Daniel had said, "This boy has hands that can do real work. He just needs not to let life harden his heart." I laughed then, never imagining those 50 words would echo in my head years later like a late omen. That afternoon I brought the letter to Harlan. He read slowly, line by line. When he finished, he took off his glasses and sighed. He is right. What Melissa has to pay is not money, it is the loss of your trust. And I am right too, I replied. If I save her, I will steal the only chance she has to grow up. We sat in silence, listening to the wind move the curtains. Finally, I said, I want to go to Zurich. Are you sure? No, but Daniel used to say, when you want to forgive, look straight at the wound. Maybe I should look at it once. A week later, I flew to Switzerland. Late autumn, Zurich was cold, the clouds low, the lake shining silver under a pale Sunday. When the taxi stopped in front of the building where Ryan was being held, I looked up at the gray stone wall and felt as if I were entering another world, where justice was no longer an abstract idea but the cold breath standing between two people who had once been family. I was not allowed to see Ryan, but a young officer handed me another small envelope. He asked me to give this to you. Inside was only a photograph. Melissa sat in an interrogation room, head bowed, hands clasped tight, white light washing over her pale face. In the corner, a rough scrawl read, "Tell her that her father would be proud if she dares to take responsibility." I looked at it for a long time, tears welling but not falling. Perhaps because I finally understood, sometimes justice does not come from a court. It comes from the moment a person faces themselves. That evening, I stood by Lake Zurich. The water lay smooth as glass, reflecting the silver sky and the city lights. I set Ryan's letter on the surface of the water. The paper was wet and then dissolved. "Daniel," I whispered, "I think I have begun to forgive, not them but myself. If you have ever held a letter that shook all your beliefs, if you have ever understood that forgiveness is not forgetting but refusing to let the wound define you, then you know this feeling. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. The trial took place on a morning in early May, in the oak-paneled room of the Charleston Federal Court. Light poured through the tall windows and fell across the floor, polished to a mirror sheen. I sat in the front row, wearing the deep blue dress Daniel once chose, with a marigold brooch pinned at my collar, the emblem of the trust I now kept. Harlan sat behind me, ready to assist, but I had made it clear, I will speak for myself. Melissa walked in. She was thinner, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes tired, with none of the defiant glint they once held. Ryan was not present. He remained in custody in Zurich. For a few seconds her eyes met mine, then darted away like someone who has once touched fire. The judge read the charges: unauthorized use of a legal entity's name, international asset fraud, and violation of lawful ownership. Each word struck like a gavel against my heart, but I sat still, fingers interlaced, my breath slow and even. When it was my turn on the stand, the prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Helena, please confirm, are you the lawful heir of Mr. Daniel Morris and the owner of ML Holdings?" "Yes." "Were you aware that your daughter and her husband used your company's name to raise funds illicitly?" "I was aware, but only after it had already occurred." "And do you intend to forgive them?" I looked straight at him, my voice calm. "I do not think forgiveness is the court's concern. Here, we speak only of the truth." The courtroom went utterly silent. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the clerk's pen scratching on paper, The judge nodded and shifted the questioning. Do you wish to pursue criminal prosecution? A long pause. I turned to look at Melissa. Her eyes were reddened, her hands trembling, yet the pride remained, like a child who does not yet understand that tears cannot replace responsibility. I answered, no. I only want the reaffirmation of ownership of the assets that are mine and those of my late husband, and let justice do the rest. Melissa's attorney rose and spoke gently. Your Honor, my client asks for reconciliation. She acted under the illusion that the company belonged to her family. There was no malice. I smiled faintly. Illusion, I said, is when people forget that kindness has limits. The gavel struck. Order. But I did not stop. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I once gave everything for the people I love. I do not ask to take back the money. I only want to take back the boundary. Because sometimes justice is not in the numbers, it is in a mother learning to say, enough. The court fell quiet for a few seconds. Then the judge tilted his head. Your request is granted. The court affirms that Mrs. B. Court and DeVille sign. Helena Morris is the sole lawful owner of ML Holdings and all related assets. Melissa broke down crying. The muffled sobs carried softly through the solemn room. I did not look at her. I simply nodded and signed the record. The pen moved slowly and surely, each stroke cutting the air as if closing a chapter of my life. When I left the courthouse, the press was already waiting. A young reporter held out a microphone. Mrs. Helena, do you have anything you would like to say to your daughter? I paused, adjusted my scarf, and answered evenly. We cannot teach others morality by anger. Only silence and consequences can do that. Then do you still consider her your daughter? I looked straight into the lens with a faint smile. Anyone can become a daughter again, but no one gets to be a child forever. In the afternoon, Harlan and I sat at a cafe near the courthouse. He looked at me with deep respect. I have witnessed hundreds of asset disputes, but I have never seen anyone as composed as you. I took a sip of tea. I have lived a lifetime among raised voices, Harlan. Now I only want to hear my own silence again. When I got home, I opened the envelope from the court. Inside was the certificate of ownership and a compensation check for $1,200,000. I set it on the table, gazed at the number for a long time, then folded it and put it in the drawer with Daniel's letter. Outside on the porch, rain began to fall, thin and steady. I opened the door and let the wet wind in. The smell of earth, tea, and wood blended into the scent of an ending, and also a beginning. I sat at the table, opened my journal, and wrote a new line. Emotional justice is not about winning or losing. It is the moment you no longer need someone to admit they were wrong, because your peace has grown large enough. If you have ever stood before the one who hurt you and still chosen to speak with composure, you will understand that it is not weakness, it is the highest strength. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. 3 days after the trial, Charleston was strangely quiet. The rain had eased, and weak shafts of sunlight pierced through the oak canopy in the yard, falling across the wooden railing I had just repainted. The house seemed to breathe more slowly. No more ringing phones, no more heavy footsteps on the floor. There was only me, a pot of mint tea, and the clock ticking steadily, as if time had finally returned to me, no longer chasing anyone else. That noon, I received a call. Melissa's name appeared on the screen, and my hand froze on the teapot handle. I watched the phone ring, the blinking light flashing across the tabletop like the heartbeat of the past. 5 rings, then it stopped. No message left. In the afternoon, the phone rang again. The same number. I let it be. An hour later, a text arrived. I am outside the city. I just want to see you once. I looked at the screen, my finger hovering over the reply key, then turned off the phone. Not because I hated her, but because I knew some meetings only tear the wound wider. That evening, I sat down to write a letter to myself. The handwriting trembled slightly, but each line was as clear as metal. Helena, sometimes people do not need more apologies, but the stillness to understand the price of a mistake. Your daughter must walk through her shame on her own, as you once walked through loneliness. I folded the letter and tucked it into the leather notebook embossed with "Begin Again." Daniel had given it to me on my 60th birthday and said, "Never think you are out of chapters to write." Now I understood. Life does not end with loss, but with the moment we dare to look it in the eye and say, "I am still here." The next morning I went to the market to buy flowers. The little shop on the corner of Meeting Street still had its chalkboard price list. I chose a bouquet of marigolds. The shopkeeper smiled. "Flowers of the steadfast. Who are you giving them to?" I answered softly, "Myself." On the way home, the wind carried the smell of waffles and roasted coffee. I stopped by the old cafe where Daniel and I used to sit. The table by the window still held a slant of sunlight, and the old wooden chairs creaked softly when I pulled one out. The young server set down a cappuccino and asked, "Would you like more sugar?" "No. I prefer the original taste now." She smiled. I smiled too, a real smile, unforced. That evening I opened my computer. There was an unread email. The address was m.keller@outlook.com. My heart tightened. I opened it. "Mom, I know you will not answer, but I still want to write. When the court ended, I looked at you and I understood why you were silent. That silence did not frighten me, it shamed me. I thought you hated me, but now I understand you were letting me grow up on my own. Ryan will not come back." He pled guilty and said it was the only way to make amends. I still do not know where to begin, but I want you to know I am no longer chasing money. I am looking for my self-respect. If you allow it, someday I want to come back to Savannah, not to ask, but to help. I read to that point, and tears fell onto the keyboard. Not loudly, just softly, like the first rain of the season. I did not reply. I only printed the letter, folded it, and placed it in the drawer where I keep all the things that do not yet need an answer, but that I do not want to forget. That night, I went out to the porch and watched the moonlight cast over the sea. The sound of the waves rose and fell like Daniel's old breathing. I said quietly, "Do you see? She is finally beginning to learn how to pay the price. Not with tears, but by rewriting herself." A light breeze passed over me and touched my shoulder, cold but gentle. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath. In the wind, I felt as if someone nodded. The next morning, I turned on the radio. The old jazz standard "Autumn Leaves" was played. I laughed because Daniel used to hate that song. He said, "It is all about parting." But now I heard something different. The song was not sad. It only reminded me that every season passes, and the most beautiful thing is that we are still here to listen. I brewed tea and sat by the window. Light fell across the old photographs, Daniel with the Mustang, me with tiny Melissa on the sands of Edisto. Everything was like a finished painting, needing no more strokes and impossible to erase. I wrote in my journal, "I once thought justice meant making the wrongdoer bow their head. But now I understand true justice is when you can look at them and your heart no longer trembles. If you have ever had a call you did not dare to pick up, ever chosen silence, not out of pride, but because you have heard enough to understand, you will know that peace does not come from revenge, but from having nothing left to lose and still being able to smile." Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the next part of Begin Again Stories. I moved to Savannah on a morning in early June when magnolias bloomed white along the streets around the bay. The little cottage sat at the end of a brick alley, with painted walls, a jade-green door, and a porch shaded by lavender. I chose this place not because it was grand, but because it was quiet. For the first time in years, I could hear the wind touching the leaves without being drowned out by someone else's voice. On the first morning, I hung a small sign on the porch, "Tea and books just ring." Not a real shop, only my way of reminding myself to open up to the world again. I did not need customers, only a reason to brew another cup of tea. That noon, while I was wiping the table, there was a soft knock. A young woman of about 25, in a white linen dress, hair loosely tied, a copy of The Great Gatsby in her hand. "I am sorry, I saw the sign on the porch. Is it real?" I smiled. "If you need tea, it is always real." She introduced herself as Chloe, a literature student in Savannah, researching Southern women authors. She asked to sit with me while she worked on her thesis, and so the quiet afternoons began. Chloe often sat at the wooden table, typing and asking me about the old days. "What did you do before living here?" she asked. I answered, "I used to be the woman who always yielded the quiet to other people." In those days, the house slowly came alive. I taught Chloe to brew mint tea, and she taught me to use my phone to photograph the lavender at sunset. One afternoon, when the light pierced the curtains and fell across Daniel's photo on the shelf, she said softly, "You look very peaceful." I smiled. "Peace does not come on its own, dear. It comes when you stop waiting for someone to understand you." A week later, I received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a small check for $25,000 and a handwritten note from Melissa. "Not to repay, but to thank you. I will come when you are ready." I looked at that line for a long time, feeling both warm and cold. I did not cry. I only set the check on the table and placed my teacup on top so it would take a round watermark like the stamp of forgiveness. That evening I told Chloe the story. Not all of it, only a few pieces. She listened, her eyes tinged with sadness. "Do you regret it?" I answered, "No. A mother cannot save her child by covering up the consequences, but she can teach her how to stand up without fearing her own shadow." On Sunday, Chloe and I went to the bay. The water was jade green, the sky crystal clear. I brought a small ceramic jar holding some dried flower ashes, the lavender I once laid out to dry on the porch in Charleston. I cast them into the water and let the wind carry them away. Chloe watched and asked quietly, "What did you just bid farewell to?" I said, "What I used to be afraid of losing." That afternoon, when we returned, I saw a gray cat sitting at the door. It looked at me with green eyes as deep as the sea. I opened the door and it slipped inside, curling up on the rug. I laughed and named it Marigold. The name sounds silly, but it fits, because even in the dark, that flower turns toward the light. A month later, I opened my email. A new message from Melissa. Only one line. "I am working at the Zurich Community Library. Every day I read with a little girl named Nora. I think you would like her." I did not reply, I only smiled. Because for the first time, my daughter was not talking about money, she was talking about books. Perhaps that is how she is learning to become a person again. In the evening, Chloe brought me a bracelet she had made from old fabric cord and wooden beads. "For you," she said, "because you taught me that older people do not run out of chapters to write." I put on the bracelet, watched the moonlight reflect on the wood, and said softly, "You are mistaken, Chloe. I am only rewriting with a steadier hand." Night fell, and a light breeze slipped through the window. I opened it and looked out at the bay. The waves beat steadily, and the cat Marigold curled at my feet. I closed my eyes and saw myself standing in a disto years ago, only this time without tears. There was only a 69-year-old woman, silver-haired, holding a teacup, smiling at the sky. I wrote in my journal, "When we stop seeking an apology, we can hear our own voice, and in that sound is the most beautiful silence in the world." If you have ever found your faith again after being hurt, ever learned to open your heart to the world even after it has been torn, you will understand this feeling. It is when you no longer need a perfect ending, only a true beginning. Share where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe to the final part of Begin Again Stories. On the first morning in Savannah, sunlight poured through the window like liquid honey, slipping across the table where the cup of mint tea was still steaming. I opened the door, and the sea breeze rushed in, carrying salt and the cries of seagulls, soft but enough to make me smile. The little cottage was quiet, only the clock ticking in steady steps and the distant sound of waves, as if to remind me that time was still moving on, but this time I was not being dragged along. I was living inside it. On the table lay an envelope set neatly in place, Melissa's handwriting. I opened it. The script was softer than before, as if each letter had been written with slow and honest breaths. "Mom, I have reread everything Dad ever wrote to you. I understand why you were silent because silence is the only way to make me hear myself. I am working at the Zurich Library. Every day I read to children, and I have realized I forgot the simplest thing, that adults must never take a child's trust lightly. I am not asking for forgiveness because I know forgiveness is not something granted by someone else. I only want you to know that I am learning to live more decently, not out of fear, but because I want Dad to be proud. When I am strong enough to return, if you still have a place for me in that house, I would like to come not to stay, but to make tea with you. I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden frame beside Daniel's photo. Sunlight struck and reflected on the glass, letting me see both my face and his, 2 generations, 2 halves of a journey. I said softly, "Do you see? It has finally begun." In the afternoon, Chloe stopped by with a basket of fresh peaches and a bouquet of marigolds. She smiled. "Summer's here. Are you really going to open that tea and books place?" I answered, "Perhaps, but only for people who know how to listen." "Then I suppose I'm allowed in." I laughed. "You've been allowed in since the first day, Chloe." We sat on the porch while the sun streamed through the lavender, making the whole house smell as if it had just been rewritten. Chloe opened her notebook and read me a passage she'd written. "It is never too late to find the part of yourself you dropped." I nodded. "Yes, as long as you're brave enough to look at it without fear." When Chloe left, I cleared the table and brewed another pot of tea. On the porch, the cat Marigold curled up, its purr blending with the sea wind. I looked out at the Savannah Bay, brightened in the sunset, birds slicing the sky and leaving curved streaks of light like ink bleeding on paper. I wondered how many people were beginning again at that very moment, not loudly, not declaring it, just living a little differently. I took my journal and wrote the final lines. "I have lived through years of being seen as weak, and then learned to be strong without the need to prove it. I have loved, lost, and found again not a person but myself. I have understood that justice is not winning or losing, but being able to sleep without torment. And I know there is no age too late to relight your own lamp." Outside, the wind carried the scent of magnolia through the window. I set down my pen, poured the last of the tea, and the sunlight caught the thin ribbon of steam, drawing a bright thread like a stitch between past and present. In that moment, I was no longer the mother betrayed, Daniel's widow. I was simply Helena, a woman who has lived enough to understand that beginning again is not a single time but many times, each time we are brave enough to forgive, to move forward, to love life once more. If this story touched you, leave a line where you're listening from and what you are beginning again in your life. And do not forget to subscribe to follow the subsequent journeys of Begin Again stories. Because you know what you have not ended at all. And no one has the right to lock you up and call it love.